Hi, this is Donald, and today I'm going to be doing a little video tutorial. I posted a video the other day of me fishing, and one of the comments that I got was, can you give a little explanation of the lures that you use? And I realized there are a lot of people that probably have that same question. When I was a kid, I learned to fish from my dad. He took us fishing and we used a couple of things. We either used a bobber or a sinker, depending on if we were fishing on the top or the bottom, and as bait we used worms or minnows. That was the extent of what I used fishing. That was fishing to me, bobber fishing or sinker fishing with a worm or a minnow. But these days I almost never use live bait. In fact, I probably haven't used a minnow in at least a decade. But what I'm going to show you today is what I actually do use when I'm fishing. And so today I'm going to show you the top 5 bass lures that I use when I'm fishing for largemouth bass. So get ready, and hopefully this will be educational. What we have here are my top 5 types of lures to use for fishing for largemouth bass. I'm going to go through each of them and give you a little bit of information on how to use them. But what we've got is my first type of lure that I enjoy using, and probably my #1 lure type right now, is the soft plastic swim bait. I've got 3 different types there that I'm going to go over in a moment. My next type of lure is the spinner bait. Spinner baits have probably caught more bass than any other type of lure except the rubber worm. The rubber worm is probably the #1 bass lure of all time. So rubber worms would be my 3rd choice. Next would be the crankbait, the hard plastic crankbait. And then my 5th choice is the curly tail jig. And a lot of people might say, curly tail jig? There are a lot of baits that I'd pull out before that. But the curly tail jig is a really versatile lure. It'll catch anything that swims. So if I'm at a body of water that I've never been to before and I don't know what's in there, I'm not fishing for anything in particular, I just want to catch fish, I'll pull out the 2-inch curly tail jig, and I can catch panfish, I can catch bass, I can catch largemouth or smallmouth bass. I've caught perch, crappie, bluegill, catfish, I mean, you name it, I've caught it on a curly tail jig. So that's why I give a lot of credence to the curly tail jig, whereas many people probably wouldn't include that on their list. So first up we have the soft plastic swim bait. I posted a video the other day when I was using soft plastic swim baits and catching lots of largemouth bass. This is my current favorite lure. A soft plastic swim bait is made to imitate bait fish. It's soft plastic, so when the bass gets it in its mouth, it's not hard like a crankbait, so he's not likely to spit it out. He'll keep it in his mouth, and it goes on a jig head like this. This one I've got, as you can see, has eyes, so it looks like the head of a bait fish. And this one's got a paddle tail. The tail moves when it's in the water, gets like it's a fish's tail, puts out vibration that's going to attract the fish. This one right here is a Kitech. This is probably my favorite, but I've got a couple of others that I think are really good as well. This guy is the Storm 360 GT. This is another one that it's got a pretty narrow profile. It's a little smaller than the others. It's got a narrow profile, so I like this a little more for smallmouth that have a slightly smaller mouth than the largemouth. But the Storm 360 GT is a really good swim bait. I've had a lot of success with this one. And then this guy is the Berkley Ripple Shad, another great lure, paddle tail. Oh, sorry, there was an ant crawling on me. Paddle tail swim bait that has very nice motion, puts good vibrations in the water, and I've caught a ton of fish with this guy. Next up is the spinner bait. Now, spinner bait is basically a metal wire with a minnow imitation and a skirt that sometimes I'll put a trailer on the skirt as well, but looks like a minnow here, and then you've got two leaves, willow. This is a willow leaf that they put out vibrations in the water, and the bass, they're sight feeders, but they also have something called a lateral line, and that detects vibrations. It's kind of like a radar system for the bass, so they can detect vibrations in the water. And so these will put out vibrations and flash that'll attract the bass, and he'll come up and eat the spinnerbait. But as I said earlier, spinnerbaits are one of the most popular bass lures of all times. They're incredibly versatile. You can fish it up high. I can slow roll it down low. I can burn it on the top. I can just do a lot with this, and it's a fairly weedless bait. Next up is this guy, the rubber worm. There've probably been more bass caught on rubber worms than any other type of lure in the history of bass fishing. And like I said, it's a pretty straightforward. There are lots of different types. There are larger ones, there are smaller ones. This guy right now, I've been fishing these with the hook right in the middle in what's called a wacky rig. But you can fish them on a Texas rig, a Carolina rig. There are just a million ways to fish these. You can use a 10-inch worm, which I use a lot, but lots of different ways you can use worms. But rubber worms have caught a lot of bass over the years. Next up is the hard plastic crankbait. This guy, as you can tell, is designed to look like a minnow. It's got a bill in the front. That piece of plastic in the front is the bill, and some of them are long. This one's short. That means that this is going to run. It's a shallow running crankbait. The longer it is, the deeper the crankbait's going to go in the water. So this is a shallow running crankbait, and most crankbaits have this guy. These are called treble hooks. They're treble hooks because they've got 3 hooks in them. So most crankbaits come with a treble hook. And then last up is the curly-tailed jig. Like I said, most people wouldn't consider that to be one of their go-to bass baits, but it is for me because, as I said earlier, I've caught just about everything in the water with one of these. You put it on a jig head and you swim it through the water. The tail puts out vibration that attracts fish. They come in all types of colors. Here's a darker one, so you can get a lot of different color varieties. But the curly-tailed jig will catch just about anything in the water. I've caught bass, bluegill, perch, crappie, catfish, you name it. I've caught it on a curly-tailed jig. So those are my go-to lures. If I'm fishing for bass, that's what I'm most likely to use. So I hope you learned something from that, and I'll see you next time.